Good morning, everyone. My name is Niklas Sandström, heading the Institute for Security and Development Policy here in Stockholm. This is an event that is funded by the US Embassy, and we're extremely grateful for this. And it's sort of looking at the technology aspect and the technology ecosystem and how we can handle foreign influence in this ecosystem without actually hurting the innovation and everything, because I think it's fairly clear that we need cooperation, we need engagement, but we need engagement and in joint research that is sustainable and open and transparent. But we had the first event in Gothenburg yesterday. It's about 2 sessions there, which was extremely interesting to listen into. We will have 2 sessions here today. And tomorrow we will have a session in Luleå. So we're trying to travel around Sweden a bit and share the insights in Sweden with our American colleagues, but also, of course, be able to foster that sort of collaboration broadly. But I'm not going to take too much time. We have the US Ambassador, Ambassador Erik Ramanathan, who's going to be able to give us a short introduction to this topic, and he's been here for 2.5 years. And if you haven't actually followed him on Twitter and LinkedIn and everything, please do. He's extremely knowledgeable. He's also been a voice for LGBTQ rights, Ukraine, and of course the Swedish accession to NATO, which I'm extremely grateful for your strong support. So thank you, Ambassador. The floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Nicholas. Dear friends, distinguished guests, it's a pleasure to be with you here today in Stockholm. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be in Gothenburg or go on to Luleå, but this is incredibly important to continue to discuss how we best navigate some of the complexities of our nation's relationships with the People's Republic of China. The Biden administration, from its inception, has been acutely aware of the multifaceted challenges that the PRC presents, not just to the United States, but to our allies and our partners, including Sweden. Happy to call it ally, by the way. Our strategy has been measured and deliberate, guided by a clear strategy to invest, align, and compete. More specifically, investing to maintain and enhance our own economic and technological strength, promoting alignment with our allies in responding to challenges posed by the PRC, and competing globally to safeguard our shared interests and our core values. In this era of strategic competition, our approach towards the PRC seeks neither conflict nor confrontation. Our aim is clear: to manage this competition responsibly, ensuring that the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of all states are upheld. And this is a testament to our commitment to a stable and secure international order. Domestically, we've taken significant steps to bolster our resilience and competitiveness through landmark American legislation like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. We've catalyzed private investment in critical sectors such as semiconductors and clean energy manufacturing to ensure that supply chains for the green transition are less dependent on problematic actors. These efforts are not merely economic measures, they're strategic imperatives that ensure our nation remains at the forefront of innovation and security in an increasingly contested world. Internationally, our focus has been on strengthening and deepening the bonds with our allies and partners. Sweden's recent journey into NATO membership is obviously a prime example of this kind of alignment in action. It underscores a shared recognition of the challenges that we face and a collective commitment to address them. Sweden's accession to NATO not only enhances our collective security, but it also sends a clear message about our united front in defending democratic values and upholding the rule-based international order. And while NATO's focus is foremost on European security in the face of Putin's brutal aggression, our transatlantic security also needs to take a more broad and a more global view of security determinants. Our engagement with the PRC brings to light significant concerns, including in the realms of academia and research integrity. There is zero question that the PRC seeks to illicitly leverage international research collaborations in both basic and applied research environments to bolster both its military and its economic interests through the exploitation of intellectual property. I'm not being alarmist in saying that. I'm emphasizing something that we already know. And I'm glad to have so many experts today to tell you a little bit more. If we are going to protect our collective national security interests and the integrity of our research ecosystems, we need to be clear-eyed about the challenges we face. And we then need to be willing to take concrete actions, concrete steps to counter these threats, even when they push against traditional ways of protecting academic freedom and leveraging international collaboration. Recent revelations in Swedish media that Chinese doctoral students in Sweden are being compelled to sign loyalty agreements to the PRC highlight the need for academic institutions to be vigilant and put in place protective measures to safeguard our academic institutions from exploitation of research efforts. There are more examples that I'm sure that will be talked about today. So I really look forward to engaging in discussions today and beyond that not only, deepen our understanding of these challenges, but also explore avenues for cooperation to address them. We need to stay lashed up, and together with partners and allies like Sweden, we can find ways to navigate these turbulent dynamics, to defend our shared values, and to secure a prosperous, stable future. As we move forward, our approach will be one of confidence and collaboration. We are prepared to engage with the PRC on shared global challenges, from combating climate change to promoting global economic stability and growth, while still remaining vigilant in the areas where our interests diverge. The partnership between the United States and Sweden, particularly in addressing these complex issues, is more critical than ever. So thank you for the opportunity to open things up today, speak with you today, and I eagerly anticipate the insights and discussions that will emerge today. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. Very insightful. And unfortunately, the ambassador will have to leave because other assignments. But I think we will be able to have some really, really interesting discussions here today. So we have 3 chairs. So we're going to have 3 persons coming up and talking. The first one is Dr. Rebecca Spike Keiser, who is the first Chief of Research, Security Strategy and Policy at the National Science Foundation, and one of the very knowledgeable persons. That has been a fantastic treat to listen in to her, both here and in Washington, about her insights. Second is Dr. Andreas Gothenberg. He should have been actually probably yesterday in Gothenburg, but he's appointed the executive director of STINT here in Sweden, and of course he has a very strong background both as a science and technology director in Tokyo, but also of course his own research. And finally, not least, we have Dr. Erik D, who is an analyst at the National Knowledge Center here in China. He has extremely knowledgeable about China and the Chinese language. So we have, I think, 3 very good speakers, and I will let them speak for themselves. So, Rebecca, do you want to start?
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much to Nicholas and to our Department of State and Embassy colleagues for this event. It's very important, I think, that we coordinate and communicate and collaborate with Swedish colleagues on these very challenging research security issues. So I'm going to talk to you today about how we in the United States are working within academia as well as internationally to make sure that we balance research security issues with responsible international collaboration, which is also extremely important. Something that I need to emphasize is that we value the open research environment. We know that that's extremely necessary. The way that innovation happens is by researchers being able to share their data and their results, because other researchers need to be able to reproduce those results, challenge them, advance them further. And again, that's how innovation happens. At the same time, we know that there are other actors, and unfortunately, a lot of it does stem from the government and the PRC that are taking advantage of this open research ecosystem. So what do we do about it? And so if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the timeline here. Andreas and I actually started coordinating on these issues back in 2017. And we started becoming aware of them as well. At the National Science Foundation, which is a $10 billion agency that's part of the US government, we fund all areas of research, mostly in the basic and fundamental research realm. So actually, we require the data to be made open. So when the intelligence community started coming and knocking on my door in 2017, telling me that there were issues related to malign foreign interference in this research, I didn't believe them. So NSF being NSF, we funded a study, and we funded a study by a group called the JASON. And these are renowned scientists in the United States who also do work for the US government in areas that intersect between science and national security. And they gave us a report in 2019 that said there are problems. There are problems in research security. And often these manifest themselves in research integrity types of ways. So in other words, there are undisclosed affiliations, undisclosed sources of funding that are being provided to US researchers that are presenting conflicts of interest and conflicts of commitment. There are ways that the review system to review and select federal research projects are being manipulated by other countries. There is misuse and misappropriation of pre-publication research and data. And there's misuse of federal research funding. And unfortunately, a lot of these problems do come from the government of the PRC. I recommend that you do review this JASON report. It is online, because it also gives several suggestions on how one can assess international collaborations, ask some questions, and be sure that it is principled international collaboration. We went on to establish policy. One of the big things is National Security Presidential Memorandum 33. Of course, it's the government, so it has to have this acronym of NSPM 33, which is impossible to remember. But it is something that's online, and we passed that in 2021 with implementation guidance in 2022. And then we also have a law, the Chips and Science Act, which we think about a lot. We think about semiconductors because it's called CHIPS. It also has several research security provisions in it of things that we do need to implement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that without too much detail. And if you go to the next slide, please. The other thing that I should mention from the previous slide is our international coordination here. So we coordinate very closely through the G7. And there's a working group called the Security and Integrity of the Global Research Ecosystem that has best practices online as well that are available for everyone. We coordinate through the OECD, and there's a report online as well in research security and integrity. And of course, we've been coordinating with Nordic country colleagues and trying to expand our collaboration in the Americas as well on these issues. So the way I think about research security here is this cell diagram. We're science, so it's a cell, and in the center of it, you see the values of research that we all embrace. And actually, as part of the European Union multilateral dialogue, there's a multilateral dialogue on principles and values of international research collaboration. And a ministerial statement was just signed a couple of weeks ago. And it was talking about these very values of ethics, responsible conduct of research, rigor and reproducibility, openness, transparency, merit-based competition. These are the things that make up our research ecosystem in the center here. And we have this membrane around it, right? Our cell membrane, which I think about as porous. And this is research security that is made to safeguard these values. And unfortunately, we do have some foreign interference that is taking advantage of this open system. So we want to safeguard it, but we want to maintain its openness. And so this is the way I think about research security. Next slide, please. Research security is important in all aspects and in all phases of research. So in the basic and applied, there are also a little bit of difference, but responsibilities. So in basic and fundamental research, we want to make sure that we safeguard our researchers' ideas. Researchers' ideas are their gold, it's their currency. And we want to make sure that these ideas are safeguarded and that researchers themselves are able to publish and own these ideas. And so if someone takes them and misuses them, then of course that's very concerning. So we also, of course, then have to pay attention to how they're being funded to do their research, do due diligence on this funding, make sure that we assess and are aware of any potential conflicts of interest or conflicts of commitment. Then Jason used the analogy that if a researcher is proposing for funding to do lung research, and they're also being funded by tobacco companies, that's something that we would want to know, because that, of course, might have some influence on their research. Same thing with other funding sources. So we need them to be transparent and we need to be aware. We need to also make sure that we assess potentially harmful end use. There's an example that we had where NSF funded the development of a large language model. And the researcher asked this large language model, how do you produce sarin gas? And the model told him no. And he published that information. That's very concerning. Of course, we wanted information on the large language model to be published. We did not want its production of sarin gas to be published. Unfortunately, that was out there. He did retract that particular part of it, but it's out there now in the ether. And we, of course, want to make sure that we differentiate and encourage principled international collaboration from research security issues. In applied research, of course, we want to make sure that we do due diligence on potential funding sources there as well, and venture capital. We want to make sure that we safeguard the intellectual property that's produced in applied research. Again, make sure that potentially harmful end use is known and we have safeguards. And that international transactions are vetted and that we're very clear and understand where sources of funding are coming from. Next slide, please. And all actors that are part of the research ecosystem have responsibility. What we're trying to do is create a research security culture and get beyond compliance. So for funders of research, we have responsibilities of making sure that there's transparency overall. And so we do emphasize disclosure to us of all funding sources, all affiliations, so that we can make wise funding decisions. We, of course, want to make sure that we assess risks, but overall, what we want to do is mitigate those risks so that we can get to yes in funding the best ideas, including in high-risk research. For research institutions, we feel that they have a responsibility to ensure that disclosures to us are complete. And of course, we want them to participate in creating this research security culture similar to a lab safety culture. We want to make sure that they review and are aware of any potential international interactions and collaborations. And researchers themselves also have a responsibility in knowing where their funding sources are coming from, making sure that they're comfortable with any agreed to affiliations, and making sure that they communicate with their home institution and their funding agency, and they're transparent as well. Again, as part of this research security culture that we're trying to create. Next slide, please. Very quickly, we are funding at NSF a center that's going to provide services to the community that's called Secure, safeguarding the entire community in the US research ecosystem. And if you go to the next slide, the purpose of this center is going to be to empower the research community to make risk-informed decisions so that they can create a safe space for international collaborations. We want the center to provide information, tools, and services to the community overall. The audience is universities, nonprofits, and small and medium-sized businesses. We're in the process of deciding who is going to operate the center for us. It's going to be operated by members of the research community itself. We envision that it's going to be about $10 million a year, so it won't be small. The United States is very big though, and so that's going to be a big endeavor overall. Next slide, please. Something else that we're actually working with Swedish colleagues on is a funding program that we're going to be establishing to do more research on research security overall. We're calling this ROARS, and we're going to be funding research projects in this realm. We're holding a workshop in late spring to start forming a community of practice. And so we want to seek research projects and fund them in these areas to identify the characteristics that differentiate research integrity from research security, to improve our understanding of research security risks and understand how to mitigate those risks, provide insight into overall what constitutes a research security violation and what can we do about it, and methodologies to assess the potential impact of research security threats. And I should also say the impacts potentially of not collaborating internationally and what that might mean. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we have research security training modules that we've funded. And if you go to the next slide, these were co-funded with other US government agencies, but they were developed again by awardees in the community. And next slide, please. There are 4 modules. They're available for anyone to download. There's one module in research security and what is it? There's a module in disclosure and why it's important to disclose. There's a module in what is risk and how to manage and mitigate it. And there's a module in international collaboration. Now, these modules, again, can be used as we see fit. In the US, if you're going to get federal research funding, it's required to take research security training, and these modules can fulfill that, but they're open to anyone. We do get some complaints that they're a bit long, but like I say, if you can binge watch a Netflix show, you can take your research security training, and there are characters that go through the training. So hopefully it's a bit entertaining and has some jokes in it. I would be very interested if you do take the training to please give me feedback and thoughts, and also how it might apply and what we might want to revise in the training to also apply to an international audience. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Andreas, do you want to?
Yes, maybe I need the HDMI cable. We have my presentation now. So, thank you very much. I'm Andreas Gothenberg, Executive Director of STINT, which is the Swedish Foundation for International Cooperation and Research in Higher Education. The foundation was set up 30 years ago by the Swedish government to support internationalization of Swedish higher education and research. So we've been primarily working as a funding organization for international projects. However, about 10 years ago or so, we realized that Swedish knowledge system needs more information, knowledge, trend analysis about internationalization so that we can have more strategic international cooperation. So since then, STINT has developed more into if we say knowledge resource on internationalization. And today's background is that we live in a VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. As an example, to start with, technology changes. A lot of big research projects like space and so has become much more accessible. For instance, in the case of space, it was large governments working on that previously. But now it's something that we see has become much more accessible. And for instance, Nigeria has sent up at least 5 satellites, and other African countries are working on that as well. Another interesting aspect of technology changes is, again in space, how 50% of all commercial satellites are owned by one private company, which I think also changed the geopolitical landscape when you have private companies working in that sphere that was entirely run by or managed by governments before. And also when it comes to society, a lot of, if we say, changes going on with distrust in democratic institutions, as well as distrust in expert organizations. And then again, back to the VUCA world, those were just 2 examples. Then we have climate change, we had the pandemic, migrant refugee crisis, ethnic conflicts, increasing socioeconomic inequality, authoritarianism, information wars, and again, lack of trust in expert institutions. So there are many things that are currently challenges for us in general. Then if we move into science, quite a lot has happened since this slide goes back until 1996. And without going too much into exactly the background of the data here, but if we just say that this slide shows top research being conducted in the world, basically outputs in top 25% citation percentile. And countries that were doing top research back in 1996 were dominated by rather similar countries in Europe and North America. They were all quite similar when it comes to political system and cultural aspects. But then if we move fast forward to 2022, which is on the right side of this diagram, you can see that, and this is the correct order, I mean, with Saudi Arabia being most frequent with outputs in the top 25% citation percentile, and then this order down. So here we can see in 2022, top research is being conducted in a lot of different countries around the world. They differ a lot when it comes to political and cultural systems. And after all, with these changes, of course, there are difficulties to collaborate in many different aspects. On the other hand, it's very good that research is conducted all across the world in many different environments, because we have to work together again to solve the global challenges that we are facing. And again, the global, the SDG number 17 is partnership for the goals. And then on the other hand, when countries rise technologically, and it seems here also that China now is producing more of the top research in the world than the US. Of course, there is increasing competition among countries. And also this leads to distrust among research, starting collaborations and so on. On the other hand, we should remember the role of science diplomacy. And if we go back to the Cold War, the US was running the Fulbright program, and Soviet citizens like Yakovlev had the opportunity to do research. I think it was at Columbia University. And later on, he became the godfather for glasnost and perestroika. So at Stint, as Rebecca mentioned, we've been working on this quite for some time, realizing that we have to address many of these issues working in a complex world. And we work with responsible internationalization. We developed this work together with Karolinska Institute, KTH Institute of Technology, and Lund University. And the term responsible internationalization is broader than just research security, because here also we include, for instance, topics like human rights, environment, and other ethical aspects. And responsible internationalization, as I mentioned, ethical aspects, but also cultural, political, and social context, legal context, consideration to institutional autonomy, and also to create a culture at universities with awareness of who am I working with and how are we working together. So we published these guidelines in 2020. And actually last year, I was happy to see an article in the New York Times with a direct link to our guidelines. So since then, they have got a lot of national and international attention, and the Swedish government is now working on an inquiry on promoting responsible internationalization, which is supposed to come out with its first results here end of March, and then by the end of the year. So by concluding this, I would like to say that it's important with international cooperation, certainly now when a lot of the top research is conducted in other places than the traditional. And we need to work as open as possible, but as close as necessary. And when it comes to measures, it's important to focus on proportionality when it comes to various kind of measures related to the issues or problems that one would face. And it's important to actively manage direct threats and grave norm transgressions. And I think very important here to provide support to manage risk. And here again, it's very important again to have knowledge about how it is in different countries, how research is conducted, what the circumstances is regarding funding and all these related aspects. So thank you very much.
Andreas, thank you very much. Very interesting. And hope the technology works once more. It worked the first time. And so Erik, the floor is yours. I think it's on the other side. Or...
Yeah. Yeah, you have a fingers crossed. Okay,
Perfect.
now you have. Can I like? All right. Would I need that part?
I just need the document for online audience.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's see. Do we need to close this thing? Oh, sorry about that.
Not really.
But these actually, it's a very interesting discussion and actually sort of really shows the complexity of, and actually for two funding agencies, how do you balance that transparency and innovation as well as securing it? And I think that that's something that's going to be, we need to look at much more because, and I'll come back to that, but China has, when Andreas, you said about proportionality, China has a lot of legislation that prohibits joint collaboration in certain areas. So the thing is, how do we stand in relation to that? But I'll probably come back to that.
Yes.
But I think Erik has solved the issue.
Sort of.
There we go. So Erik, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Let's just see to remind myself what I'm going to say here. Anyway, my name is Erik Welin, and I work as an analyst at the Swedish National China Center. I also have a PhD but you might be surprised, I have my PhD in. It's not exactly science, but it's science fiction. I wrote my PhD in science fiction, Chinese science fiction to be more specific. So I was thinking when I was preparing this presentation, and I think that maybe that's a pretty apt metaphor for China in general. China can sometimes seem a little bit like something out of science fiction. Certainly China's rise as a science nation can seem as something out of science fiction. And I have colleagues, at least in my field, who usually quite often describe China as something of a parallel universe, which I guess is a metaphor to saying that things work, they play by different rules over there. And I think that's a pretty good starting point to thinking a little bit about China and sort of research security, these kinds of issues. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about this mostly, this thing I wrote for the National China Center recently, a commentary on these recommendations that the EU Commission released on January 24th this year. Proposal for a council recommendation on enhancing research security. Yes, this is basically a proposal containing recommendations, general recommendations to member states and universities and so on within the EU to enhance research security, so-called research security and so on. And quite importantly, of course, this policy is also so-called country agnostic. So it's not aimed at a particular country, but be that as it may, it's quite clear that the most important factor, which is the other speakers have already been on to a little bit, that this is perhaps the most important factor, China's rise as a science nation, because China is now approaching or has already reached global leadership in several important research areas. Most importantly, so-called critical technologies, such as artificial intelligence and quantum technologies. And as was already mentioned, China has, according to some measurements at least, already surpassed the United States, both in terms of quantity and quality. in terms of research in general. So it really speaks to China's meteoric rise as a science nation. And importantly, military-civil fusion has also been raised to the level of a national strategy under the leadership of Xi Jinping, which of course has made the European Union member states and so on a lot more concerned about these issues. There have been a lot of reports in European media about universities collaborating with researchers collaborating with Chinese researchers linked to the Chinese military and so on. So responding to such concerns, the Commission released actually already in 2022 a document entitled Tackling RNI Foreign Interference, which covered much of the sort of same ground as these new recommendations did. In some ways, I will get into what's really new about these recommendations, if anything, in a minute. But just to summarize briefly, what these proposals are all about. Basically, they comprise of a policy document and two so-called fact sheets with specific advice on how to implement research security and engage in risk appraisal. Basically, general recommendations to member states on how to, and also funding organizations and universities on how to improve research security. And member states are encouraged to draft their own national guidelines and so on, and also establishing so-called national hubs, which I guess is sort of these kinds of centers where researchers can go to get advice on these issues. And also it discusses the intention to establish a European Center for Research Security within the EU. If we look more in detail on what's really new about these recommendations, as I mentioned, this early document from 2 years ago already covered a lot of the same ground as this document. But as I write in this commentary, perhaps the most important thing that's new about this document is that it's clearly directly aimed at the member states and not at the universities and research organizations per se, because it also has to, the proposal has to be adopted by the Council, the European Council. So this is a way to sort of ensure political commitment from the member states. And it's also clearly aimed stated in the document, the sort of agency of the member states is really emphasized. So this is perhaps the most important difference. And I guess we can also mention research security as a concept, which is already, I think, we've been on to, perhaps also emphasizes the agency or the national interests more than the individual researchers and research funding organizations and so on. So that's also an implication that this is really kind of a signal to the member states to shape up their research security in that sense. It's also part of a larger package, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, of economic security within the EU, which perhaps can also be read as a signal, at least that's what I write in the commentary, that this is a signal that these kinds of issues and mitigating risk in research collaboration is no longer sort of just a concern of the research community, but it's also sort of part of this EU's strategy to reach open strategic autonomy. This package is also a continuation of this earlier, or this European economic security strategy, which was launched in June last summer. Yes, implications for Sweden, I guess. Basically, maybe the conclusion is that maybe it's not that much at this moment. It doesn't imply any major policy change in terms of the Swedish context. Much of this has already been going on, or a similar process has been going on in Sweden for some years. And it partly mirrors the process of leaving these sorts of issues in the hands of the research community itself, and now to having the national government a bit more involved. We have these national guidelines which are to be launched this year. So in that sense, it's maybe not that much news for Sweden, I guess. I guess I also conclude that practical implementations remain difficult. So the question is still out there, and how this is actually going to be implemented in practice. some concluding reflections, perhaps. I guess since this debate is going to continue, one thing, as other people have also argued, is I think with China, it's going to be very difficult to have this kind of binary approach of either completely preventing risk or ignoring risk. We'll have to perhaps learn to live with how to manage risk. China is just too much integrated into the whole research system or global research infrastructure, and China is just too complicated to be able to approach in this kind of binary way. So we'll have to be able to manage risk and think about how to do that. Think about both sort of advantages and disadvantages. And I also think perhaps that with these so-called country agnostic policies, which I think is generally a good idea, it seems perhaps not a good idea to sort of country-specific policies with risk is sort of stigmatizing researchers with a certain background, and that might not be something we want. But I think with that, we might want to encourage country-specific knowledge. I bring this up because sometimes, at least I've heard these kinds of arguments with people at the universities that, well, China, we don't want to learn about China because, maybe we'll have to learn about some other country in a few years. And we don't want to spend this time on China. But it seems to me that China is more of it's a reflection of a more structural change in geopolitics and geoeconomics. It will be here to stay for some time. We'll have to sort of make more visits to this parallel universe that is China a bit more often. That's, I guess, the conclusion that I might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And actually, that might be country-specific, country-agnostic. I mean, I think we need both in a sense, but I'm sure that's also what you referred to. But I'm just struck by, for example, a couple of the points here that, for example, you would actually find Iran in a very high profile. I'm really happy to see that Russia was not the top 25, and they should not be. We need to ensure that there are problems when dealing with those states. But as been pointing out, China, as an example, is leading in so many areas, not least in green technology. And if you as I do believe in climate change, it is a partner that we need to engage with. There are other aspects of it with artificial intelligence that might have more problematic situations where, of course, the usage of Xinjiang as a testing ground, etc. How do we balance this? I mean, of course, Rebecca was touching on this, but more in detail, how do we ensure that we deal with it, innovate with innovation, but making sure that we're not getting that or supporting states that should not be supported? And again, the Russians should be kept out, but others we need to engage in somehow. How do we do this without crossing the line? And I'm not sure we can let. I find that some universities, of course, are more dependent on Chinese funding, for example, than others. How do you ensure that when a university is fully dependent on Chinese funding, that they maybe doesn't include them in certain research that should not include it?
I think we differentiate, of course, between types of collaboration. So we have some more formal collaborative programs, international programs, where we combine funding with our international partner. And we do have some of those collaborative programs with the Natural Sciences Foundation of China. We're very selective in those programs, those formal collaborative programs, because we want to make sure that there is a clear benefit to the United States researchers as well. So as an example, we have a program in biodiversity, because this provides access to our US researchers to data and areas in China that they wouldn't be able to get access to otherwise. And so there's clear benefit there. We also have programs in, the ecology and evolution of infectious diseases for obvious reasons as well. There's also, of course, the less formal collaboration that our researchers have with their Chinese counterparts. And that is very large and broad. And so in those cases, we recommend then this set of questions that I mentioned earlier be asked. And these are questions such as, do you know where your partner's funding is also coming from? Have you managed all the conflicts of interest and are you aware of them? Can you very clearly identify the mutual benefit of this collaboration? Is it very clear from the beginning who owns the data that's going to be produced and how those data are going to be distributed? These are the types of questions that I think in any international collaboration should be asked, and you should be able to clearly answer them to enter into the collaborations. We also do have to be aware, however, of some of the obligations that researchers in other countries might have, that they don't have a choice. So if there's a researcher that is affiliated with an entity that has close connections with the People's Liberation Army, there are obligations that they might have to transfer some of their research and their knowledge for military purposes. And we do have to be aware of that. So again, we have to be just careful about collaboration with those entities and the topics that we're collaborating on.
Yes, I agree with Rebecca. And in order to have this kind of environment, it's very important to create this culture in universities so that they work internationally in a responsible way, considering all these different aspects, and that there should be a natural thing for researchers, no matter what country they're working with, to think about these aspects. Who am I working with? Why do they want to work with me? And what do I want to get out of this cooperation? And I think that's something that has to happen in the universities. And universities being these open environments, but still they need this kind of culture. That's
Yeah, just to comment on that just shortly, I think I completely agree, because I also think my impression is that with researchers, it tends to, we don't want it to sort of turn into a checklist. You just cross off the, yeah, now I've done this, and then I can move on with my research project. But if you have this, if you cultivate a kind of ethical culture of sort of character traits that are always asking questions that might not have been asked yet, because you never know which questions you might have as a researcher. So I think that's really important to not to make it into just a list that you're crossing off because somebody from outside has told you so.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important to keep in mind. So I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I agree on this checklist, because it's also so easy to be in a way blind that you cross these different boxes and then you, as you say, forget about them entirely, and then the project goes on a few years and you completely forgot about once what you actually crossed in those boxes. And what we did after coming out with our guidelines together with the universities that I mentioned back in 2020, we also in STIN's application portal implemented some new measures where we want researchers to actually write how they are addressing responsible internationalization. Because if we have the boxes there at the end of the application, and we know that these all the researchers, so most of them like to submit their applications in the last minute, and then you have a few boxes at the end. So again, with the checklist, it's not necessarily much thought behind that. But if you have to formulate a few sentences at least, then it's easy to see if these aspects have been considered or not. And then one can basically get more information how well informed the researchers are. And again, that this is something that should be repeated every now and then among the researchers.
Absolutely, and of course, I mean, personally, I also work with Chinese military as an example. I'm a director is also engaging, upcoming speaker, also engaging regularly, and we need to because it's security issues. We can't exclude them. And the same with some of the research now the Chinese are leading, but at the same time, there's this challenge, not least, I mean, we had two very important legal changes in 2017 in China, where virtually you're obliged to hand over any information that the Chinese government can actually extract from you. And I assume it's not only the Iranian legislation, but I would be surprised if we don't have something similar there. And of course, Russia, but also other states. I mean, how do we deal with those issues as well? I mean, this is a complex thing, but at the same time, I do want to underline, I mean, you need collaboration, international collaboration, or else you stagnate. I mean, I just finished a text on supply chain security, and it's extremely apparent how much you lose in terms of economic development if you don't engage. So, yeah, how to manage?
It's challenging. I mean, I have to say there are those in the US and you know those on Capitol Hill who would prefer that we just don't collaborate at all. And we do have laws where collaboration with Iran is really almost impossible in science. So you need a special Department of Treasury license, and it's very, very difficult to get. And collaboration with Russia is also currently not allowed. But with the PRC, there's been talk about stopping international collaboration. I do think that we need to, of course, be careful. But if we limit all collaboration, then we have the issues that you talked about. We can't advance. We can't take advantage of the know-how and knowledge that definitely is there. So another approach that's being discussed is whether we should develop a list of concerning entities in China that have military ties and limit international collaboration and from an entities list perspective. I also am concerned about that because I think that might get to what we were talking about earlier of a checklist. And this is okay over here because it's not on this list. And instead, we have to encourage more of this cultural approach of changing the culture for researchers. That's easier said than done for sure. But I think the approach that I think we need to take is rather than the government just telling researchers what to do, that we have to look at this more as a partnership. So this approach of establishing centers where we are providing information and we're providing tools and we're providing services, but it's not requirements, so that we are more collaborative in that regard, I think is important. We also have to learn more to speak the researcher's language and use terms that I think resonate more. So when we have the intelligence community communicate with researchers and they're saying good guys and bad guys, and they're showing these pictures of people who have been arrested, that's not going to resonate, and the brain will turn off right away and nothing is going to be heard. And so we've really been working hard at having the science agencies help and be the communicator, because I think that works a lot better. And I know that similar things are happening elsewhere as well.
Anyone want to jump in on?
I agree with the lists because that would be impossible to handle because it's so dynamic. And if any country would end up with research on this blacklist, of course, they would move the research the next week to another institution. And then we would have to spend a lot of time updating these lists.
So it is a challenging sort of path to walk. And then the thing is, the way I see it, it's, we also have a tremendous challenge. I mean, it's individuals that we're looking at. And actually, I think I heard in Gothenburg, like how many of the researchers and PhDs in the US and Europe who are foreign born, and it's the majority is outsiders, and that we need that innovation, of course. So how do you balance this and how do we deal with it? But I think that we will actually get. I would like to save some of the questions also to the roundtable discussion in the end of the day.